Hi everyone, and welcome to Bridging the Gap. Today I'm joined with Caroline Howard. She's the executive digital editor and producer at Forbes Media. She sets the editorial strategy, agenda, and voice across all of Forbes platforms and global markets. And she also oversees more than 50 staff, writers, and interns. Most importantly, she's one of the edit leads for one of the popular series you may know, 30 Under 30, and the Top College Projects. Caroline is a writer with a passion for education, public policy, social entrepreneurship, women, and philanthropy. And I'm so excited to have her join us today on Bridging the Gap. Thank you again for taking the time to speak with us.
Hey, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Could you perhaps start us off by sharing a little bit about your journey and how you ended up where you are today?
Okay, so obviously from your very kind introduction, I work on the digital side of Forbes Media, but I didn't start out working digitally, and in fact, I didn't even start out working with words per se. My first experiences working in journalism began when I was in college on my college newspaper, and I was a photographer and a photo editor. And I pretty much stuck with that career for many years. One of my first jobs out of school, I was a photographer and a photo editor at one of the alternative news weeklies in New York City. I then moved on to the Associated Press, which is the international news wire. And then from there, I moved on to working at different glossy magazines, among them Vogue and Vanity Fair, and then finally the New Yorker. And it was a tremendous experience working with photography. I worked with great artists and really had a chance to challenge myself creatively by, taking ideas on news events and trying to create compelling imagery that really told the whole story in oftentimes just a single shot. But I kind of soon discovered that the ceiling for rising through the ranks of the masthead of a magazine or a newspaper was pretty low for a photo editor. It was pretty much, that was it. Once you were a photo editor, you were never going to be, editor-in-chief or design director. They were very different skill sets. And so I went back to school. I went to Columbia and got a master's degree in journalism. And then from there started a freelance career with People magazine that lasted a while. My very first assignment was on 9/11, going to all of the religious institutions, not all, but to many religious institutions in New York City to see how people were praying. And then for the next 2 weeks was down at ground zero pretty much every single day. Worked there for many years, then moved on to going digital. I realized that without that sort of knowledge base that my skill sets were going to be antiquated pretty quickly. So I worked at AOL for about 18 months and then came to Forbes, where I started on a new vertical called ForbesWomen, which was for entrepreneurial and business-minded women. And then I've since moved on to all the different franchises and responsibilities, which you have already mentioned.
I find your journey really interesting because it isn't, like you said, your standard path, so to speak, where you started in journalism from the start and kind of worked your way up. You came kind of from, like you said, like a digital and photography angle. Have you found that that skill set helped you kind of carve out a unique voice in your portfolio or in your writing as you worked your way up to Forbes?
Yeah, I think that having a singular, very sort of defined expert skill set is really important for a person when they're developing their career. But I think equally so, like having, as you use the word, like a portfolio of skill sets. That's really what I think has helped me so much, is that I'm able to think visually, I'm able to think digitally, I'm able to think, in regards to like creating a narrative and a story. And where we are right now in journalism, having the ability to do all of those different things really makes a big difference. And so while, there's a lot to be said for somebody honing like a very, very deep specialty and developed knowledge and, anything from like sports to science or whatever it is, that's invaluable. But for me in my career, what I found to be most invaluable is just picking up, different ways of thinking and different ways of working along the way.
And how do you pick up those different ways of thinking and working, but also kind of stay true to your unique voice? And what I mean by that is you explain the your various journey to the different publications, and they're very different. Like People is a very different type of content and voice than something like a Forbes. So how did you kind of carve out that voice while still being successful in those publication verticals?
Right. Well, I mean, to tell you the God's honest truth, Forbes and People magazine may seem different on the surface, but actually they're not. They're always telling stories about people. And I think the most successful journalism really, I mean, you can take a Forbes angle and have it be business and, have it focus on metrics and numbers and things like that, or, a people angle where you can focus on, the tragedy or the the joy in my dog rescuing my baby before it drowned in the bathtub kind of things. I mean, yeah, superficially they're really different, but the main thing is always how to tell the most compelling stories. And so as a journalist, at least when when I was training, your voice is always really important, but objectivity was really very much sort of that was the standard, that you just sort of wanted to always keep that sort of frame in mind. Much more recently, people are much more out, people meaning journalists are much more out with their individual voices and point of view, even off the opinion pages. And so it's not that difficult for me to, to have the ability to, to work at things that might be so different as Vogue, People, and Forbes. And yet, like I said, journalism really is very much, it's always a human angle, and, it's storytelling.
Stories, I think I agree in the sense that stories are really kind of the underlying root and powerful in kind of every way we connect now, whether it's journalism and media, but it's also even like social media as well. It seems to be those compelling stories or those digital stories particularly that kind of draw someone in. In your experience, do you have any advice of kind of the key traits or elements that make a compelling story?
Well, I mean, I think the number one thing is giving yourself time to, to settle into who the characters of your story are. Now, obviously, a newspaper reporter or somebody who's working on a website that's just like, spot news, everything, right away, of course that's storytelling also. And I don't, that's a skill set that I in fact do not have. I cannot write that quickly. But for me, it's just about like, taking time to really know sort of what the arc of your story is, who the characters of your story are, and then finding those voices in that atmosphere to sort of fill it all in. So, so for me, when I'm creating a story, and when I'm creating a story can even be, making a list like 30 under 30 or ranking top colleges. Those are stories also. And so, the preparation, getting ready to make sure that you have like what this arc is going to be, and then finding a way in order to fill that in, that's the most important thing. So for me, it's always very much about like research, deep research, reporting, talking to people, and literally for me, it's talking to people on the phone or whatever. It's not email exchange. And then just finding, the time in my own head, and, pen and paper, computer, just trying to detail out what the structure is. That's the most important part for me, because the other part, it just sort of flows once you're able to do that.
How do you find the balance between the research and the fact component versus, I guess, the human element of a story? Because I find in publications there are some that are like a very kind of, like you said, kind of character driven and about experience, versus others that are very much more fact driven. Do you find that plays a role in your compelling story?
Well, I mean, I guess you have to figure out, really what it is. I mean, obviously, you kind of would like to have a little bit of both in every story. I mean, you need sort of that kind of color, but you also need to, root it in some kind of reality. I had a professor once, and I guess it was in Columbia, who likened, like the way that you compose a story, either to like a pearl necklace or like a balloon and string. And so like, the balloons would be the color part, the fun, the quotes and the atmosphere and then this and that. And then you have like the string, which is keeping the story tied together. And that's much more of like your facts and your reporting and your thesis. So I always try and think of things in those terms.
That's an interesting analogy.
Yeah, but again, this is like the whole thought just sort of really transcends just a written through piece. I mean, it's the same thing. Right now, we're planning our 30 under 30. We're getting ready to do our video series with some of the nominees, and so it's really important as we go into these videos where we're going to try and tell somebody's entire story. And what makes them, a 30 under 30, especially one of our call outs, tell that story in, a minute, 30 seconds, 2 minutes. And the way that you do that is, you walk into the situation, completely prepared with all of your facts, and then let them color it in with their anecdotes and, their body language and with how their accent and, whatever it is. And so, and it's the same even with building sort of an infographic. I mean, you just need to sort of figure out, all right, like what point am I trying to get across? Because the last thing that you ever want to do is just be like one or even two-dimensional. I mean, everything's much more complicated than that. That's what makes it interesting. And so, there's always that search for three-dimensionality.
For writers who are kind of at their beginning of their career, what would you recommend is kind of that best step for them? Should they be focused on developing, for example, like a writing portfolio, or should be more focused on developing that voice? Like, what do you feel comes first? Do you develop that voice through your career, or is that something you should be finding before you kind of get too far along?
Yeah. Well, I guess it depends on if you want to, if you want to be paid for it or not. Now, I hire a lot of junior employees who work at Forbes as producers. And so sometimes they write and sometimes they edit and whatever it is. But if they don't have that portfolio, when they walk in the door, it's hard for me to even consider hiring them because, voice matures, and a voice you can get input from your editor. In fact, that's one of the best ways to develop is, you have other people read your stuff, or, like I said, with videos, people watch what you produced and infographics. I mean, you always learn from other people, whether they're your colleagues or your superiors or whatever. But if you don't have that body of work to start, so the best thing to really do is, roll up your sleeves and just start doing it, not sort of think about what your voice is going to be.
In my own experience, I can relate to that in the sense I look back at some of my old publications and look at it like, who was I when I wrote this? Because you can see the evolution, so to speak,
Yeah,
of
yeah,
like when
yeah.
you first started off versus where you are now.
Wow, that's
So
kind of like the beauty of it, really, isn't it?
yes, yeah. No, I think you're right. You kind of can learn as you go, which is very similar to entrepreneurship in the sense of like ride the bike as it's getting built. If you kind of paralyze yourself and just continue to worry and stress about starting, then you're never going to kind of get to that finish line.
Right.
Now, you particularly have in your career, and particularly with Forbes right now, I yeah, I love your role because you're focused on kind of what one all my favorite kind of portfolios so speak of women and youth with Forbes 30 under 30 and such. So I was curious in terms of how if those elements and those themes were always kind of a passion and part of your work, or if that was something that you discovered later on.
Mm-hmm. I would have to say that most of what I do right now is something that is a passion that I've developed over time. And so, as I mentioned, initially I was really interested in photography and news. I just loved news. And so what I was doing kind of really fit that. And I went through a period right after I got out of graduate school where I just loved interviewing people and talking to people, and the gig at People Magazine was so perfect because I didn't really do a lot of celebrity stuff, which is very difficult to do, and doesn't there isn't a lot of candid conversation going on when you're interviewing a celebrity. And so, I did, the kind of more real people story. And so that really just kind of fit with where I was at. And, as far as like being interested in supporting women in leadership positions, it's something that I've obviously am intimately familiar with. But I didn't start kind of working in that realm until I really got here. And the same thing with education. I mean, obviously, I've been educated. Everybody's gone through school. It's such a hot topic. But since I've been here, it's become something that I'm really, really passionate about. The transformation of education, and the same thing with kind of young entrepreneurs and the millennial generation. I do think that I'm obviously not part of that generation, but I do think that there's opportunities primarily because of technology, but also because of the numbers, where there's just opportunity for young people in a way that, certainly wasn't there when I was growing up.
As you're watching and you're the millennial generation, so to speak, and even as you read the stories from things like Forbes 30 under 30, is there a spot where you feel that we could better bridge the gap for opportunities for young leaders?
Well, I mean, I do think that that it generally in all industries there's an openness to respecting young people and their ideas and their input in a way that I don't think has been in that way in the past. Especially in newsrooms, which are pretty hierarchical, and there's a definite expectation that people put their time in for no other reason is that everybody else put their time in. And so I do see, a lot of movement, particularly here, but also, just in the entire media landscape, where there's definitely an openness to the new ideas of people with a millennial generation. And that's that industry. Our 30 under 30 covers, excuse me, many different industries. And so if you look at an industry like manufacturing or energy, that's more of like a slow go with incorporating a lot of millennials into that, and similar with health and science, and they're really still very much invested in moving up through the ranks. With science, PhDs are normally required, which obviously, there's time involved with that. I mean, it's hard to get a PhD at all before age 25 or 26 anyway. And so it really is kind of like an industry by industry thing. But on a personal note for people, one of the things that we're asking our under 30s this year is do you think that your youth is an asset or not? And I think that the important thing is for young people to definitely recognize the drawbacks of their age, and that they don't have maybe the same experience, but to really kind of focus more on what the advantages are, because that's the best way for you to sell yourself in any industry.
In my experience, I think it's a little bit of both. You can view, just like there is like a glass ceiling for women, let's say, there certainly is, I believe, like an invisible one sometimes for young entrepreneurs or youth. Because of our age, depending on, like you said, which industry, there could be certain views that we have to work our way up the ranks. So some of the ideas and things may not be taken as seriously.
Right.
But I do think as well that passion and that enthusiasm to see the world in perhaps a different light, where we're not as jaded quite yet from those who are up in the ranks, gives us that fresh perspective to come up with the solutions we're looking for. So
Right.
I do think that it definitely can be an asset. But you have to believe in it, so to speak, and like you said, kind of see through some of the obstacles and understand your industry, I think.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that.
So looking at your journey, if you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice when you were kind of amidst that journey, what would that be?
That's an interesting question. I do think that what we were just talking about before actually really kind of resonates for me, and that's one of the reasons why I really like working on this under 30 project so much, is that I definitely grew up at a time where in an industry where young people were not really taken seriously, and young women were really, really not taken seriously. And so I bought into that. I bought into that for a little bit too long, I think. And so the best advice I would give myself would have been not to do that at all. And I do see that it's just such a different era for young women now, who are very kind of like vocal and upfront about their self-possession and their belief in themselves and what they can do and what they can offer. And I just find that to be so great. I mean, I just love it, and I wish that I could have been that way when I was younger.
With that in mind, how do you balance the line, though, of being able to still kind of align with the industry of working your way up, but still also be vocal without, you know what I mean, without kind of rubbing the wrong way within your own industry?
Is this for young people, you mean? Like how to be vocal without like coming off too brash?
Yeah, I guess so. Like if they obviously this way of thinking and such is different than obviously the decision makers in our employers will be seeing us. So how can we still kind of be vocal and understand that our voices are to be heard even in our organizations without kind of disrupting upper leadership?
Yeah. No, I think it is a tightrope, because listen, I could tell you that there are young people I work with here, and I just think like, geez, like you're really a bit cocky for like being on the job for 3 years, and so it's definitely kind of like an attitudinal thing. I think it's, like many things, it's just a matter of, how you present yourself and how you present your ideas. I mean, you could say the same thing, but you say it in two completely different ways, and it's taken in two completely different ways. And so I think that, one should always be kind of respectful, both to yourself, but also to the people that you work with. And so, it's one thing to come in and be like, you guys are doing everything the wrong way. And another way to say, like, I have an idea to make this much more, efficient, and, everybody's going to, get more work done, blah, blah, whatever it is. And so it's really just very much a matter of, how you're perceived, and that's partially, up to the person who's talking. There are some people who are, never gonna take what a young person says seriously, and you gotta live with that and then move on to find people who will. That's all.
I was speaking with a colleague earlier, and we were talking about the power of leading from behind. And I think what you described is a really good scenario that describes that, in a sense of kind of helping others see your vision, and so helping your team see the value in your idea and how that can benefit the team as a whole, rather than coming in and saying, this is my idea or the highway, or you're doing something wrong. Instead, kind of a collaborative approach of working together in that shared vision.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's a nice idea, to leading from behind.
Do you have any last final thoughts or advice that you have for young leaders out there?
I think that the whole notion of bridging the gap is such an important notion, because it really encompasses two things, and both of which is in the power of the young people that you're talking about. One, right, which is it's very action oriented, that do you want to bridge the gap? And it's like, your desires and your goal setting is what's going to propel you to whatever success that you want to achieve. And so, sort of keeping that part in mind, and also recognizing that whatever size of the gap there is, depending on whatever industry you're in, seeing things for what they are. I mean, if there is, seeing reality, like, okay, this is it, this is the gap. How am I going to find a solution to that helps fit whatever my definition of success is, and then going after it.
Thank you again, Caroline. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us on Bridging the Gap.
Yeah, super fun. Thank you.
For those of you listening, now it's your turn. What do you think? Add your thoughts to the discussion using the hashtag Bridging the Gap on Twitter, and give this podcast a thumbs up if you like some of the advice Caroline has shared. Thank you again for listening, and together we can start bridging the gap between industry and youth.